The smoke alarm didn't wake them up. It was my radio that woke me up. Structure fire, single-family residence, Ridgeview Estates, multiple occupants trapped. I sat up in my bunk before my brain even caught up with my body. Ridgeview Estates. There was only one house in Ridgeview Estates that mattered to me. There was only one house in that entire gated, manicured, untouchable neighborhood that I had grown up in and then walked away from. My childhood home. I pulled my gear on in under 60 seconds, the way I'd trained 1,000 times before, but my hands were shaking for the first time in 3 years. Not because of the fire. I had run into burning buildings before without blinking. My hands were shaking because somewhere inside that house, behind those tall white columns my mother loved to show off to her friends, were the same people who once stood in that grand foyer and told me I was an embarrassment to the family name. The same people who told me a firefighter's uniform was beneath us. The same people who did not come to my graduation from the fire academy because my mother said, and I quote, "We don't want people thinking our daughter works a blue-collar job." Now their house was burning, and I was the one racing toward it in the back of Engine 14, sirens screaming through the dark, while my crew chief barked orders and my heart pounded out a rhythm that had nothing to do with adrenaline and everything to do with history. Before I tell you what happened when I walked through that door, let me take you back. Because to understand why this moment broke something open in me, you need to understand exactly what they did to me first. You need to understand what it feels like to be raised in a house full of people and still grow up completely alone. This is the story of how I became someone my family was ashamed of, and how that shame ended up. I grew up in a house that looked like something out of a magazine. Tall white pillars out front, a circular driveway with 2 cars that cost more than most people's homes, a mother who hosted charity galas twice a year, and a father who ran a chain of private wealth management firms across 3 states. To the outside world, we were the picture of American success. Inside those walls, though, there were rules, unspoken ones, but they were carved into the house as deep as the marble floors. Rule 1. Appearances came before everything, before feelings, before honesty, before family loyalty. If it didn't look good at the country club, it didn't happen. If it didn't photograph well for the Christmas card, it wasn't allowed to exist. Rule 2. My older brother Marcus was the standard everyone else was measured against. He went to the right university, joined the right fraternity, and eventually took a junior position at my father's firm, which everyone celebrated like he'd cured a disease. Marcus never had to raise his voice to get what he wanted. He just had to raise an eyebrow and my parents would scramble. Rule 3. And this one was mine alone. I was expected to marry well, not to build something of my own, not to have a career people respected, just to be presentable, agreeable, and eventually attached to a man with the right last name. I didn't understand how deeply this rule ran until I was 16 years old, sitting in the kitchen with a stack of college brochures. I had circled a nursing program, a paramedic program, and one small pamphlet for a regional fire academy that I'd tucked underneath the others because some part of me already knew how it would be received. My mother picked up the stack, flipped through it with 2 fingers like she was handling something unpleasant, and set it down without a word. Later that night, I heard her on the phone with her sister. "Claire wants to be some kind of rescue worker," she said, laughing softly, like it was a phase. "I keep telling her, sweetheart, that's not the kind of woman men in our circles marry." I remember standing in the hallway outside her office, listening to that laugh, and feeling something inside my chest go very quiet and very cold. It wasn't the last time I would hear that laugh directed at my future. About one afternoon when I was 14, because I think it explains more about my family than almost anything else I could describe. I had spent 6 weeks building a working water filtration model for my school's regional science fair, staying up late every night after homework, sketching designs, testing materials, rebuilding it 3 separate times until it finally worked the way I wanted it to. It wasn't fancy. It was made of plastic tubing, gravel, sand, and charcoal, held together with more hope than craftsmanship. But it worked, and I was proud of it in a way I hadn't been proud of anything before. The night before the fair, I set it up carefully on the dining room table to do one final test run, timing exactly how long it took to filter a cup of muddy water into something clear. Marcus walked in from football practice, saw the model taking up space where he wanted to set down his gym bag, and without a single word swept it off the table with his forearm. It hit the floor and shattered. Tubing snapped. The glass beaker I'd used for the collection cup broke into 3 pieces. 6 weeks of work, gone in about a second and a half. I remember standing there in complete shock, not even able to cry yet, just staring at the wreckage on the floor while Marcus stepped over it without so much as glancing down, already scrolling through his phone. When my father came into the kitchen and saw me on my knees, gathering broken pieces with shaking hands, he didn't ask what happened. He sighed, the particular sigh he reserved for moments he found tiresome, and said, "Marcus said it was in his way. You know how he gets before games? He needs room to decompress. Clean it up before your mother sees the mess." Not a single question about the 6 weeks of work. Not a single word of comfort. Just an instruction to clean up quickly, quietly, so the house could go back to looking the way it was supposed to look. I didn't go to the science fair the next day. I told my teacher I'd gotten sick. I couldn't bring myself to explain what had actually happened, because some part of me had already absorbed the lesson my family was teaching me over and over again. My effort didn't matter enough to protect, and my pain didn't matter enough to acknowledge. That night, I sat on my bedroom floor with the broken pieces of my project in a shoebox, and I made a promise to myself that I didn't fully understand yet, but that I would spend the next several years slowly fulfilling. I promised myself that one day I would build something in my life so solid, so undeniably real, that no one would ever be able to sweep it aside. Kind of loneliness that comes from being unseen inside your own family, and I don't think people who haven't lived it can fully understand how heavy it is. Marcus got applause for things that were expected of him. I got silence for things that should have been celebrated. When I made the honor roll, it was met with a distracted nod. When Marcus got a B+ in a class he barely tried in, my father took him to dinner to reward his effort. By the time I was 17, I had learned to stop expecting anything different. I threw myself into volunteering at the local EMS station on weekends. Something I told my parents was for my college applications, because I knew that was the only framing they would accept. In truth, it was the only place I felt like a real person. Out on those calls, nobody cared what my last name was or what my mother wore to the last gala. They cared whether I could keep my hands steady and follow instructions under pressure. I could. I was good at it. Better than good. I still remember the first time I helped stabilize a car accident victim on the side of the highway, holding pressure on a wound while a paramedic talked me through it, and feeling something settle inside me that had never been settled before. Purpose. That was the word for it. I had never felt purpose inside my own house. I felt it there, kneeling on asphalt in the rain, with strangers. When I told my parents I wanted to apply to the fire academy instead of the business program my father had already picked out for me, the temperature in the house changed overnight. My father didn't yell. He never needed to. He simply set down his fork at dinner, looked at me the way you'd look at an employee who had made an embarrassing mistake in a meeting, and said, "You understand what people will think, don't you? A Reyes daughter, hauling hoses and covered in soot. Do you have any idea what that does to this family's image?" My mother added, softer but somehow crueler. "Marcus is going to run the firm one day. He needs a wife who elevates the family. You need a husband who can provide the kind of life you were raised in. This little firefighter idea, Claire, it's not a career. It's a rejection of everything we've given you." I sat there, 18 years old, staring at the tablecloth, and I made a decision that would define the next decade of my life. I decided that if loving me required me to shrink myself into someone I wasn't, then I would rather be unloved and whole than loved and erased. I applied to the academy behind their backs. I got in on my own merit. No family connections, no strings pulled. And when the acceptance letter came, I didn't celebrate with them. I celebrated alone in my room because I already knew what their reaction would be. That final year at home that I have never been able to fully shake. And I think it's the moment that made leaving inevitable instead of just possible. I was 18, a few months from graduating high school, when my mother informed me over breakfast that she had arranged for me to attend a dinner with the Whitfield family. The Whitfields owned a chain of luxury car dealerships across the state, and their son, Bradley, was 24, recently out of business school, and according to my mother, exactly the kind of young man who could give you a comfortable life. I hadn't asked for this dinner. I hadn't asked to meet Bradley Whitfield. I certainly hadn't asked to be presented like a product at a trade show, but that's precisely how it felt, sitting across from a stranger while our parents discussed real estate and stock portfolios, as if my future were simply another line item to be negotiated. Bradley wasn't cruel. I want to be fair about that. He was mostly just bored, checking his phone under the table and asking me exactly 2 questions the entire dinner, both about what kind of car I drove. What unsettled me wasn't him. It was watching my mother's face light up every time he spoke, watching my father lean in and laugh at jokes that weren't particularly funny, watching the 2 of them perform an entire evening of hope that had nothing to do with my happiness and everything to do with how our 2 family names might look combined on a wedding announcement. On the drive home, my mother turned to me with genuine excitement in her voice. "He seemed to like you," I could tell. "We should have you 2 over again next month." "I don't want to see him again," I said quietly. The temperature in the car changed instantly. "Claire, do you understand what an opportunity like this means? The Whitfields are one of the most respected families in this state. A match like that would set you up for life." "I don't want to be set up," I said. "I want to choose my own life." My mother laughed, the same laugh I'd heard through the office door years earlier, the one that always meant she thought I was being naive. "Choosing your own life is a luxury for people who don't have a family name to protect. You have responsibilities, Claire, whether you like them or not." I sat in silence for the rest of the drive, staring out the window at streetlights blurring past, and I remember thinking, very clearly, that my mother had just told me the truth about how she saw me, not as a daughter with her own future, as an asset to be positioned correctly. 3 weeks later, I found the Fire Academy brochure in a stack of college mail, and something about the timing felt less like coincidence and more like a door finally opening in a hallway I'd spent my whole life. My mother cried, but not the kind of tears you'd expect from a proud parent. She cried the way you cry when you're embarrassed, when your carefully built image has a crack running through it that you can't paper over. "What am I supposed to tell people at the club?" she asked, dabbing her eyes with a napkin like the crisis was happening to her, not me. "That my daughter wants to be a fireman." "Firefighter," I corrected quietly. "Don't correct me in my own house," she snapped. My father didn't even look up from his newspaper. "If you do this," he said, in the same flat tone he used to fire underperforming employees, "don't expect this family to keep supporting a decision that humiliates us. You want to throw away the life we built for you? That's your business. Just don't come asking for help when reality sets in." Marcus, sitting at the head of the table like he already owned it, smirked into his coffee and said the words that would echo in my head for years afterward. "Enjoy your little hobby, Claire. Some of us have real careers." I want you to sit with that for a second. A real career. As if running into burning buildings to pull strangers out with your own hands wasn't real. As if choosing to save lives instead of managing other people's money made me less than him. I packed one bag that night, not out of some dramatic impulse, but because I had been quietly preparing for this moment for months, the way you prepare for a fire drill you hope you'll never actually need. I had a small savings account from babysitting and part-time work that they didn't know about, because I'd learned early that anything they knew about, they controlled. I walked out the front door of that mansion at 19 years old, past the circular driveway, past the manicured hedges my mother paid a landscaping crew to trim every single week, and I did not look back, not because I wasn't scared. I was terrified, but because I understood in a way I couldn't fully put into words yet, that staying inside those walls would have slowly killed the parts of me that made me worth knowing. I moved into a shared apartment above a laundromat with 2 other academy recruits. My mattress was on the floor for the first 4 months. I ate ramen more nights than I'd like to admit, and I have never before it built me back up. That's what it's designed to do. Instructors screaming inches from your face while you carry 80 pounds of gear up 6 flights of stairs. Live-burn training where the heat is so intense you can feel it trying to peel the confidence right off your skin. Physical tests that push your body past what you thought were its limits, over and over, until your limits move. Nobody in that academy cared that my last name used to open doors. Nobody cared what my mother's Christmas card looked like. They cared whether I could drag a 200-pound dummy out of a smoke-filled room in under 90 seconds. They cared whether I panicked or whether I performed. For the first time in my entire life, I was being judged purely on what I could do, not on how well I fit into somebody else's picture of who I should be. I discovered something in those months that my family had spent 19 years trying to convince me I didn't have. I was strong. Not just physically, though I did become stronger than I ever imagined. I was strong in the way that matters most, the kind of strength that doesn't need an audience or an approval rating, the kind that just shows up again and again, even when it's exhausted and afraid. I graduated top of my class. Nobody from my family was in the crowd. My roommate's parents drove 4 hours to be there, and when they saw me standing alone after the ceremony, they didn't ask questions. They just pulled me into their group photo and told me to smile. I still have that picture. It means more to me than every formal portrait that ever hung on the walls of the Reyes. A busy urban station that saw everything from kitchen fires to multi-alarm structure blazes to the kind of car accidents that stay with you long after the scene is cleared. My captain, a woman named Renata who had been fighting fires for over 20 years, became something my own mother never was, someone who actually saw me. "You've got good instincts," she told me after my first real structure fire, when I'd helped locate and carry out an elderly resident who couldn't find his way through the smoke. "Instincts like that you can't teach. Where'd you learn to stay that calm?" I almost laughed. I wanted to tell her that staying calm under pressure was the only skill my childhood had actually prepared me for, just aimed in a different direction. Instead, I just said, "Lots of practice," and let her believe it was about the job. Over the next 3 years, I earned every promotion the hard way. I studied on my days off. I volunteered for extra shifts. I learned to read a building the way some people read a book, understanding what the smoke was telling me, what the heat was telling me, what every creak and groan of a structure under stress actually meant. I became someone other firefighters trusted to have their back in the worst 5 minutes of a stranger's life. My family, meanwhile, sent exactly 2 communications in 3 years. A generic holiday card the first Christmas, with no personal note inside, clearly sent by whoever managed my mother's mailing list, and a single text message from Marcus, 8 months before the fire, that read, "Mom's asking if you're seeing anyone yet. Might want to have an answer ready for Thanksgiving." Not "how are you?" Not "are you safe?" Just a reminder that in their eyes, my worth was still measured by proximity to marriage, not by the lives I had already saved. I didn't go to that Thanksgiving. I worked a double shift instead, because at least on that day in that firehouse, I knew exactly of the academy because it's the closest I ever came to proving my family right. We were 3 weeks into live burn training, and my body was breaking down faster than I expected. I had a stress fracture in my left foot that the medical staff cleared me to train through with tape and painkillers, a decision I questioned every single morning when I laced up my boots. I hadn't slept more than 5 hours a night in over a month. My savings, the quiet babysitting money I'd been so proud of when I left home, had shrunk down to less than $400, and rent was due in 11 days. That week, we ran a search and rescue drill inside a smoke-filled training structure, full gear, zero visibility, a simulated victim to locate and extract within a strict time limit. I got turned around twice. My air alarm went off with almost a third of the building still left to search. I failed the drill, and I failed it badly, in front of every instructor and every recruit in my class. Afterward, sitting on the curb outside the training tower with my helmet in my lap, I let myself cry for the first time since I'd left my parents' house, not because of the failed drill itself, but because of the voice that came rushing in right behind it, the voice I thought I'd already left behind on that driveway. my mother's voice, laughing softly, my father's voice, calling it a hobby, Marcus's voice, calling it a little rescue worker fantasy. For a few minutes, sitting there exhausted and aching and completely alone, I genuinely considered calling my father and asking if the offer to come home was still on the table. It was my roommate, a recruit named Denise, who found me out there and sat down without saying anything for almost 5 full minutes. Finally, she said, "You know the difference between people who make it through this program and people who don't? It's not talent. Half the people who wash out were more naturally gifted than half the people who graduate. It's just whether you get back up one more time, then you want to quit." I thought about the shoebox of broken plastic tubing I still had, somewhere in a box in my closet, the one I'd kept as a promise to myself. I thought about every dinner where my accomplishments were met with silence, while Marcus's were met with applause. And I realized, sitting on that curb, that if I quit now, I wouldn't just be giving up on the academy. I'd be handing my family exactly the ending they had always predicted for me. Proof that I really didn't have what it took. Proof that their doubt had been right all along. I laced my boots back up the next morning. I retook that search and rescue drill 2 days later and passed it clean, under time, with the instructor nodding once in approval before moving on to the next recruit. It wasn't dramatic. Nobody cheered. But it was the moment I stopped needing anyone to cheer for me at all. And that turned out to be far more valuable than any applause my family could at Engine 14 that I still think about. Because it's the night I finally stopped hearing my family's voices in the back of my head every time I put my gear on. It was just past 2 in the morning when the tones dropped for a fire at an apartment complex on the east side of the city. The kind of aging building with too many units and not enough working smoke detectors. By the time we arrived, flames had already broken through a 3rd-floor window, and a woman was leaning out of a 4th-floor window above it, screaming that her 2 children were still inside. My captain assigned ladder rescue to another crew, but the interior stairwell was our fastest path if we moved immediately, and someone needed to go up and clear the smoke-filled hallway before the ladder team could even get close enough to help from outside. I volunteered before I had fully finished processing what I was volunteering for. The stairwell was a furnace, heat pressed down from above, thick and physical, the kind of heat that makes your gear feel like it's fighting against you instead of protecting you. I kept one hand on the wall, counting doors the way I'd been trained, calling out through my mask at every landing. On the 4th floor, I found the mother, half collapsed near her doorway, having tried to go back in for her kids and been driven back by smoke. I got her stabilized, handed her off to the firefighter behind me, and made a decision that still sits at the center of who I understand myself to be. I went further in, alone, toward the sound of a child coughing somewhere past a bedroom door that had started to blister from the heat on the other side. I found both kids huddled in a bathroom, exactly where their mother had trained them to go in an emergency. Wet towels stuffed under the door just like they'd practiced in a school fire drill. I remember the flood of relief that hit me when I saw them moving, conscious, terrified, but alive. I got the younger one on my hip and pulled the older one by the hand, and we made it back down that stairwell together. One slow, deliberate step at a time, my lungs burning even through my mask, my mind completely silent except for a single repeating thought. Almost there. Almost there. Almost there. We got both kids out, both fully recovered. Their mother found me 2 days later at the station, not to make a scene, just to say thank you, holding both of her children's hands so tightly her knuckles were white. That night, lying in my bunk afterward, unable to sleep, I thought about my mother's voice from years earlier. That's not the kind of woman men in our circles marry. I thought about my father calling it a humiliation. I thought about Marcus calling it a hobby. And for the first time, none of those voices carried any weight at all. They had been wrong, not opinion wrong, factually, provably wrong. I had just carried 2 children out of a burning building with my own 2 hands, and no country club, no Christmas card, no marriage prospect on earth could have given me what that moment gave me. That was the night the last thread connecting my self-worth to their approval, Captain Renata earlier, but I don't think I've properly explained what she came to mean to me, and I think it matters, because this story isn't only about what my birth family failed to give me, it's about what I found to replace it. Renata had been fighting fires since before I was born. She had a laugh that filled the entire station bay, and a way of looking at you when you were struggling that made you feel like your struggle was completely normal, instead of something to be ashamed of. The first time I broke down in front of her, it wasn't after a hard fire. It was after a phone call with my mother, one of the rare ones, where she'd spent 10 minutes describing a cousin's engagement party in detail and never once asked how my training was going. Renata found me sitting on the tailgate of the engine afterward, staring at nothing. She didn't ask what was wrong right away. She just sat down next to me, handed me a lukewarm cup of station coffee, and waited. "Family stuff?" she finally asked. "They don't see me," I said. "They never have." Renata nodded slowly, like this wasn't the first time she'd heard something like it. "You know what I've learned in 22 years of doing this job? Family isn't always the people who share your blood. Sometimes it's the people who show up, the people who notice when you're having a hard shift and cover for you without being asked, the people who trust you with their life on a bad call and then buy you a beer afterward like it was nothing." She gestured toward the bay, where 2 other firefighters were laughing over an engine repair, completely unaware they were being talked about. "That's your family now, too, if you want it to be. Nobody in this building cares what your last name is or what car your parents drive. We care whether you show up, whether you're honest, and whether you've got our backs. That's it. That's the whole membership requirement." Over the following years, Renata became something my own mother never managed to be, a steady, unconditional presence who believed in me before I'd proven anything and kept believing in me through every failure along the way. She was the one who talked me through my first line-of-duty loss, a veteran firefighter from a neighboring station who died in a warehouse collapse, sitting with me in the quiet aftermath while I processed grief I didn't have language for yet. She was the one who pinned my lieutenant bars on my collar years later, hands steady, eyes proud in a way that didn't need to perform for anyone watching. I want to be clear that I don't say any of this to diminish what blood family means to other people, or to pretend the ache of my parents' absence didn't matter simply because I found people who filled some of that space. It did matter. It still does, in ways I'm still working through even now. But Renata and Denise and the crew at Engine 14 taught me something my childhood never could, that love and respect are not things you have to earn through appearances or bloodlines. Sometimes they're simply given freely by people who choose you again and again, shift after shift. In late October, when the tones dropped at the station, I remember the date because it was exactly 3 years, 2 months and 11 days since I had walked out of that mansion for the last time. I had stopped counting on purpose around year 2, but some part of my brain apparently never stopped keeping score. "Structure fire, Ridgeview Estates," the dispatcher's voice crackled over the radio. "Reports of a fully involved second floor, multiple occupants confirmed inside." My stomach dropped before my mind even processed why. Ridgeview Estates wasn't a neighborhood our station usually covered, but a mutual aid call had come in because their local volunteer department was already stretched thin on a multi-vehicle accident across town. We were the closest available engine with the right equipment. I climbed into the truck automatically, the way training takes over when your conscious mind is still catching up, and it wasn't until we were 3 minutes out that the address flashed across the mobile display, and I felt the floor drop out from under me. It was my parents' house. I didn't say anything to my crew. There wasn't time, and honestly, I wasn't sure my voice would have worked even if I'd tried. I just focused on my gear, checked my mask seal, and let the discipline the academy had drilled into me take the wheel, because the alternative was letting panic take it instead, and panic gets people killed. When we pulled up, the scene looked like something out of a nightmare painted in orange and black. Flames were rolling out of the second-floor windows, the same windows that used to belong to my old bedroom and Marcus's old bedroom, thick black smoke pouring into a sky that still somehow had stars visible above it. Neighbors stood on the lawn in bathrobes, phones out, filming instead of helping, exactly the kind of crowd my mother would have hated being seen in front of under any other circumstance. And there, near the edge of the driveway, half collapsed on the grass, was my mother in a nightgown, screaming. "My husband," she was shrieking at anyone who would listen. "My husband is still inside, and Marcus went back in for him." My captain grabbed my arm. "Reyes, you know this house." "I used to live here," I said, and something in my voice must have told her everything she needed to know, because she didn't ask a single follow-up question. She just nodded once and said, "Then you're going in with me. Move." I want to be honest with you here, because this story isn't about pretending I felt nothing in that moment. Part of me, a small, human, imperfect part of me, thought about every dinner table insult, every dismissive laugh, every "enjoy your little hobby, Claire." For half a second, standing at the edge of that burning house, I felt the weight of every single time they made me feel small. But that half a second passed, and what took its place was something stronger than resentment. It was purpose. Because whatever they had done to me, whatever they still hadn't apologized for, there were still human beings trapped inside a burning building, and saving lives had never been about who deserved it. It had never been conditional. That was the whole point of who I had become. Command, Engine 14 Interior Team going in for 2 confirmed victims. Second floor, I heard myself say into my radio, voice steady in a way that surprised even me. Then I walked back through the front door of the house that once told me I wasn't good, a wall of it pressing against my gear even before I crossed the threshold. Visibility inside was almost zero. Thick black smoke rolling along the ceiling and dropping lower by the second. I dropped into a low crouch, sweeping my gloved hand along the wall the way I'd done hundreds of times in training and dozens of times in real fires, orienting myself by memory of a house I hadn't walked through in over 3 years. The layout came back to me faster than I expected. Foyer, staircase to the left, hallway leading to the study where my father spent most evenings, avoiding actual conversation with his family. I called out through my mask, voice amplified by adrenaline. "Fire department, call out if you can hear me." A weak cough answered from somewhere near the base of the stairs. I found Marcus first, collapsed halfway up the staircase, one arm still stretched toward the second floor, like he'd been trying to crawl toward our father's study before the smoke overtook him. My brother. The same person who once told me my career choice was humiliating. The same person who never once, in 3 years, asked if I was okay. There was no hesitation in me. There couldn't be. I hooked my arm under his and started pulling him down the stairs, calling for backup on my radio at the same time, my training running on autopilot while a part of my mind that had nothing to do with training simply thought, hold on, I've got you. We got Marcus out to the second team waiting at the door, and I watched for half a second as they started working on him, oxygen mask going over his soot-streaked face, before I turned right back around and went for my father. The study was worse. Flames had already crept along one wall, and the heat inside was intense enough that I could feel it trying to work its way past the seams of my gear. I found my father on the floor near his desk, unconscious. The same desk where he once told me not to come asking for help when reality set in. I didn't think about that in the moment. There wasn't room for it. There was only the job, the same job that had defined my entire adult life, the job my family had once called a hobby, a humiliation, something beneath the Reyes name. I got my arms under him, using every ounce of the strength I'd built over 3 years of training that my parents had refused to celebrate, and I dragged him out through the smoke, back down the hallway, back through the foyer where his portrait used to hang, back out the front door into the cold October air. There was a moment halfway down that hallway with my father's full weight against my shoulder, where my legs nearly buckled. Not from his weight alone, though that was significant. It was the hallway itself. I knew every inch of it. I knew the exact spot on the wall where a family portrait used to hang, the one taken the year I turned 12, the one where I was positioned slightly behind Marcus because the photographer said it balanced the composition better. I knew the exact floorboard that used to creak outside my old bedroom door, the one I used to step over on nights. I didn't want anyone to know I was still awake, reading by flashlight under my blankets. Walking through that smoke, dragging my father past all of it, felt like walking through two houses layered on top of each other. The house I remembered, cold and glittering and untouchable, and the house that existed now, structurally weakened, filled with heat and ash, stripped down to nothing but studs and drywall, and the desperate animal need to survive. In a strange way, that second house felt more honest than the first one ever had. I got my father through the front door just as a support beam gave way somewhere behind us with a groan that I felt in my chest more than heard. My crew took him from my arms almost immediately, oxygen mask going over his face within seconds, one of the paramedics already calling out vitals to the hospital on standby. The moment we crossed the threshold, my crew took over, and I stumbled back onto the same lawn I had walked across the night I left for good, chest heaving, mask fogged, hands shaking now that the adrenaline had nowhere else to go. My mother was still on the grass, and when she saw me pull off my helmet, when she saw who exactly had just walked out of that fire carrying her husband, something in her face broke open in a way I had never seen before. Not the performance of emotion she gave at galas, something real. "Claire," she whispered, "that was you. You went in for them." "That's the job," I said quietly, and I meant it in the hospital being treated for smoke inhalation. Marcus spent 2. Both of them survived, and both of them, for the first time in my adult life, had to sit with the fact that the daughter and sister they had spent years dismissing was the exact reason they were still breathing. I visited the hospital once, on my day off, still in plain clothes, no uniform, nothing to prove. I wasn't there for an apology. I told myself that walking in, and mostly I believed it. My father was the one who spoke first. He looked smaller in that hospital bed than I had ever seen him look across a dinner table. "I told you not to come asking for help," he said, voice raspy from the smoke. "I never imagined I'd be the one who needed it from you." It wasn't a full apology. My father has never been a man built for full apologies, but it was the first honest sentence he had spoken to me in years, and for him, that was its own kind of surrender. I sat down in the chair beside his bed, the same kind of plastic hospital chair I'd sat in 100 times beside strangers we'd pulled from accidents, and for a long moment, neither of us said anything. The machines beeped steadily beside him. Somewhere down the hall, a cart rattled past. "I used to tell people at the firm that my daughter worked in emergency services," he finally said, staring at the ceiling instead of at me. I never said firefighter. I always found a vaguer way to say it. I told myself it was because the details didn't matter. I know now it was because I was ashamed, and I didn't want to sit with what that shame said about me. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked, not accusatory, just genuinely wanting to understand. Because 4 days ago, the only thing standing between me and dying in that study was the exact thing I spent years being embarrassed to admit was mine, he said. "That's not a coincidence I can explain away anymore." I didn't cry in that hospital room, though I came close. Not because his words undid 20 years of damage in a single sentence. They didn't, and I don't think any single conversation could have. But because for the first time, my father was looking directly at the gap between who he wanted the world to think I was and who I had actually become, and choosing not to look away from it. My mother cried again, but this time it wasn't about what the neighbors would think. She held my hand, the hand that still had a faint burn mark along the wrist from where my glove had shifted during the rescue, and she said, "I spent your whole life afraid of what people would say about you. I never once stopped to think about what they'd say about how I treated you." Marcus didn't say much. He's not the type. But 3 weeks later, an envelope showed up at my station addressed to me. No note inside, just a donation receipt for $2,000 given in my name to the burn unit that had treated him. It wasn't an apology either. But knowing Marcus, It was as close as he was capable of coming, at least for now. Here's what I want you to understand about this story, because it's easy to walk away thinking this is simply a revenge tale. The underestimated daughter proving her family wrong in the most dramatic way possible. And on the surface, maybe it is. But that's not actually the point of it. The point is this. I never became a firefighter to prove anything to my family. I became one because it was the truest version of who I was, the version they had spent my entire childhood trying to talk me out of. I built a life on my own terms, brick by brick, shift by shift, without their permission and without their blessing. And when the moment came where their lives depended on someone with exactly my training, exactly my discipline, exactly the career they once called a humiliation, I didn't hesitate, because that was never who I chose to become. I didn't save them to win an argument. I saved them because saving people, all people, deserving or not, grateful or not, is simply who I am now. That was never up for debate, not even for them. Sometimes the people who tell you your dreams are beneath you are the same people who will one day need exactly what those dreams built inside you. And sometimes the best revenge isn't cruelty. It's simply becoming so fully, unapologetically yourself that the people who doubted you have no choice but to watch you carry them out of the very fire their doubt October night. And I want to tell you honestly that this isn't a story with a perfectly wrapped ending, because real life rarely gives you one of those. My father and I talk now, maybe once every few weeks. It's not warm, not exactly, but it's honest in a way it never was before. Last month he asked me, for the first time in my entire life, what a normal shift actually looks like. Not out of guilt, or not only out of guilt. I think, in his own limited way, he was genuinely curious about the daughter he spent 2 decades refusing to see clearly. I told him about a car accident call, about a training exercise, about the new probationary firefighter I've been mentoring at the station. He listened. He didn't compare it to anything. He didn't mention the firm or the club or what anyone else would think. For my father, that quiet, uncomplicated act of listening was its own kind of apology. My mother has changed more slowly and in smaller ways. She still cares deeply what people think. That part of her may never fully disappear. But she asked me, a few months ago, if she could come watch a live burn training exercise from behind the observation line just to understand what my job actually involved. She stood there in her expensive coat, completely out of place among the smoke and the shouted commands, and afterward she told me, voice shaking slightly, that she had no idea how much skill and discipline the job actually required. It wasn't a full reckoning with 20 years of dismissiveness, but it was the first time she had ever tried to see my world instead of asking me to abandon it for hers. Marcus and I are still working things out. He's in therapy now, something I never imagined my brother admitting to anyone, let alone me. We had one real conversation, a few months after the fire, where he finally told me that growing up as the golden child came with its own quiet weight, the constant pressure of never being allowed to fail, never being allowed to be anything other than exceptional. It didn't excuse the cruelty. I told him that directly and he didn't argue, but it helped me understand, at least a little, where some of it had come from. We're not close the way siblings in movies are close, but we're honest with each other now, and for the two of us, honest is further than we've ever gotten before. As for me, I'm still at Engine 14. I made lieutenant 6 months ago, the youngest in our station's history to reach that rank. I still work the same demanding shifts, still carry the same gear, still walk into the same kinds of fires that my family once called an embarrassment. Except now, when I put on that uniform, I don't feel the ghost of my mother's laugh or my father's disappointment or Marcus's smirk following me into the smoke. I just feel like exactly who I always was, finally free to be her without apology. If there's one thing I hope you take from this story, it's this. You don't owe anyone a version of yourself that makes them comfortable. You don't owe your dreams to people who only value what reflects well on them. Build the life that feels true to you, even if it means walking away from the very people who were supposed to support you the most. Because one day, if you're patient, if you're disciplined, if you keep showing up for yourself even when no one else will, that life you built out of nothing but your own conviction might just turn out to be the very thing that saves everyone who once doubted it. If you made it this far, I hope the story reminded you that walking away from people who diminish you isn't a rejection of family. Sometimes it's the only way to become someone capable of truly showing up when it matters most. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of betrayal, resilience, and the kind of justice that isn't about revenge, but about finally becoming exactly who you were always meant to be.